I think there is only one place to start, and I know the game was on Sunday, on Super Sunday, but obviously there is still more fallout and more reaction to what happened at the Etihad Stadium as Manchester City and Arsenal drew 2-2 courtesy of that very, very late John Stones equaliser. Let's start off with in The Guardian, and this is what they have on their back page. It's, of course, Rodri, we know and we've known for a long time the quality he possesses, but also how unique he is for Manchester City. I mean, even Pep Guardiola said that he's irreplaceable, so Henry I mean. This is a huge blow, isn't it? I mean, this is the sort of player if there was one player that City wouldn't want this to happen to, surely it's Rodri. He's such a key part of Manchester City's spine, and you saw last season when he was suspended for the 3 games that Manchester City lost them all. I mean, it's an important story on many levels. First, obviously, and clearly for him the anguish he loves playing. He's one of the most sort of intelligent observers and most measured individuals. He's almost like a statesman for Manchester City, so the frustration for him at doing the ACL. Obviously, the impact on Manchester City's season, their bid for another title, but there's a broader element this, and I know Cross has been covering this as well. The PFA and FIPRO, the Global Players Union, have been campaigning, doing a lot of reporting and reviewing and talking to players met. And Mlango, the chief executive of the PFA, has been going around and talking to players about the workload. So Rodri played 63 games for club and country last season, 68 the games the year before, and the plan, or the hope is that players would have a maximum of 55, so clearly he's in the red zone over. That obviously an ACL is slightly different. It's not sort of wear and tear or whatever, but it's just desperate that it's happened for him. But there's broader issues here, and it completely backs up the PFA and FIPRO campaign about player fatigue and player workload. Let's come back to that point in a moment, but John, in terms of where this leaves Manchester City, obviously Pep Guardiola is deemed Calvin Phillips not up to the sort of required standard to play that role that Rodri plays. He's not at the club. But then what are the other options? Kovacic, Gundogan, sort of a combination of them, Rico Lewis, maybe even potentially at the base of midfield. Well, the point, David, is that we're looking for solutions there that we won't be able to find. He's absolutely irreplaceable. I think he's a magnificent player. I think when you consider what he achieved last season, and in previous campaigns as well, unprecedented success. He's their leader. He's their talisman. He's what makes Manchester City the footballing machine that they are. He anchors that midfield to absolute perfection. His unbeaten record, which stretched back for so long, is just a remarkable testament to his quality and his ability. He's also such a deep thinker. Had the pleasure of interviewing him last season, and we sort of kind of had a good hour together, and he's such a deep thinker. And it was, he was talking about, perhaps beyond his playing career, being a sort of a, part of the game beyond management, beyond coaching. He wanted to go into kind of the administration of perhaps of football, and you could really see him do that because he just thinks so deeply on and off the pitch. He's a brilliant player. He's what he is, in my view, the reason why the foundations as to why Manchester City have become the best team in the world. They unquestionably are, in my view. They play the best football. They've been an absolute joy under Pep Guardiola, swept all before them. And losing him is a massive miss. Henry's so right. And I know we sort of kind of go back to it about the sort of the stats, and obviously Rodri was one of the most outspoken. Last week, he was talking about the strike. If you ask any physio or any medical professional, they will point to a correlation between ACL injuries and fatigue. Honestly, the numbers are startling. I mean, really, this should be a wake-up call for football. Let's hope he's back, because he's a wonderful ambassador for the game as quickly as possible. But I tell you what, football must learn its lessons. Fair play to the PFA and Mlango, because they're doing a brilliant job, I think, in highlighting that they cannot let this drift. They must take the fight on, and Rodri's been at the forefront of that, and it'll be a sorry miss, not just for Manchester City, but also for the quality of the Premier League, if indeed he is out for the rest of the campaign. And you think of, the games he's played with Spain at the Euros, the expanded Champions League. There's a new expanded Club World Cup as well, which he could presumably be involved in. So you just think the expansion of these competitions is another thing that plays in here. Just to come back to you, Henry, on the point that you made about almost like the cap. How would that be executed? How would it be? How would it operate? Because clearly there's going to be opposition to that. If you sign a player, a club signs a player, or a national manager wants to use that player, then they will want to use them as much as they deem fit. It's a really good point, and it would have to be worked out not simply on number of performances, but on minutes. Because if you can effectively play 55 minutes and in 55 separate games, so it'd have to be done on a sort of minutes thing, I think, the countries. And the clubs, they work so closely on this. The issue, as John's alluding to, is with FIFA and the Club World Cup at the end of the at the end of the season, because that's an absolute ridiculous competition just to sort of shoehorn in there, effectively having an 11-month season for. Players now, there's not so much sympathy for players amongst the public, amongst fans, because that they are very well paid, and you could say to them, well, if you're going to a quarter fewer matches, then you're going to take a sort of a quarter less in your wages, but that headline. There on the back page of the Times, Rodri out for months. Look at his face, look at me holding his knee. That is a terrible image for football and FIFA. Everyone at FIFA should be looking at themselves as well as looking at the picture and thinking of the workload and the pressure they're placing on these star players. The game shouldn't be about FIFA. It should be about players like Rodri. It should be about Manchester City fans, Spanish fans going to games and wanting to see Rodri. And they're not going to be able to possibly for the rest of the season. Yeah, and look, there are many different games that are played. Of course, you talk about that the FIFA Club World Cup being expanded to 32 teams, but also teams have not just pre-season friendlies and tours, but they have post-season friendlies, going to Australia, but for just a game which is a number of issues connected to it. John, do you think you will ever get to a place where it gets so serious that players or a single player decides to just call it and say, no, I will not do this, effectively go on strike? I think it's a possibility, David. I know that it divides opinion whether it could happen or not. One thing that always amazes me is that players, multi-millionaire players, sign up and support each other and are unified in support of their union. And it's remarkable, really, and I just think it's incredible credit to the players to have that unified base as members of the Professional Footballers Association, and I think we should applaud that. And I think the PFA now under Metanogo is really taking great strides and going places, making a stand, being very vocal, presenting the evidence really of too many games. And I do genuinely think there will come a time when the players will stand up under the guidance of the PFA and say enough is enough. We are not entering another competition. It has to be, I think basically you have to reach almost a threshold and say we're not entering this competition, whether that's the FIFA Club World Cup or not. We don't know, but let's see. I just think at the moment all the players want to play in the Premier League, of course they do, and the Champions League, there's extra 2 games, and what people seem to be missing on this in the Champions League, in the groups, the old group stage, it used to be 6, 6 games, and what a couple of those were against the sort of whipping boys. Now it's greater intensity, so you've got more games of greater intensity, and that's putting even greater pressure on the players. Look at the schedule that these players have had. If you're not looking at City, look at Arsenal, the week that they've had. It's too much, it is too much, but the players are always asked to sort of play because we love watching the best games, don't we? Love watching the best players, but there has to come a point where football will eat itself and will do so much damage to itself, as indeed Rodri is finding out to his cost this week. I can't tell you enough. If you ask a physio, there's a direct correlation between fatigue and ACLs. There really is. And I think it's a really worrying step, and I think it's a sort of kind of a point in time for the PFA to say enough is enough. And I'm sure players will listen and stand up behind them. Yeah, and I think, look, in terms of football eating itself, as you say, John, well, football's only got the best players if the best players are playing at their best and fit. And we know that players carry injuries. They're not always 100, they're 70 or whatever. But my goodness, if you want to watch Erling Haaland, he's only 50 because he is carrying serious injuries that surely affects the product of the game as well.